Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Again, just bear with me. I'm doing
Good
the
evening, ladies
shit.
and gentlemen.
Just
That's
not what I want. There we go. Okay, now just share. Okay, we're good to go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I'm your host, Kevin Mears, demonologist, paranormal investigator, and the Paranormal Encyclopedia. Just bear with me. Okay, I apologize for the buffering that apparently is going on. YouTube's being difficult. There's not a whole lot I can do about that. So, um, like I said, I am Kevin Mears, demonologist and the Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am back after taking last week off to consider and contemplate some things and decide on topics. Um, and tonight we've got a good one, I think. I'm going to be talking about the apocalypse, the Christian one, talk a little bit about Ragnarok from the Norse mythology, Judaism's idea of it, and particularly why we can all calm the heck down and realize that Corona is not the end of the world. Before I get into that, though, I do want to remind everybody that in just 2 weeks, on May 16th and 17th, and hey Teresa Hall, Gold City PM, always a pleasure. But remember, May 16th and 17th, Wrath of Khan, the Corona Apocalypse, is going to be a thing. We already have a website up. There'll be a link in the description below. We have if you go to Facebook and look up Wrath of Khan, there's a page for it. We'll have a event page of it, an event up by the end of tonight. It's very exciting. I'm super looking forward to it. I have a bunch of new and cool magic tricks I'm going to be doing. We've got a lot of really great guests: Staker Stoker, John French, Patrick Thomas, Lil Thor, all are going to be on. We got things worked out. You'll be able to see their some bios and information about them on the webpage once I get that link out to you all. Do check it out. Remember, this is going to be a completely free virtual convention that you'll be able to enjoy right in the comfort of your own home. So all of the social distancing ever. And it'll be fun. But so let's get into tonight. So why am I doing a show about the end of the world when I don't think the world is ending? The thing is, a lot of people I know, even very calm, normally rational people, seem to really think the world that like we're in the end, we might be in the end times. They want to know about, well, isn't pestilence one of the horsemen of the apocalypse? Is Corona a sign of the end? All these other details. And there's some things from a historical perspective, and there's certainly some things from a theological perspective and a biblical perspective that I wanted to talk about to help people calm down and realize Corona is serious. Don't misunderstand me. Let me be absolutely clear. Starting out. The coronavirus is a serious health threat. It needs to be taken seriously. People should be practicing social distancing. That is not what I am advocating. I not what I'm advocating here. The whole 5G causes corona is complete and utter hogwash. David Icke is an idiot if you hadn't figured that out from all the times that he's insisted that the Bush family and the royal family of Great Britain are actually lizards from outer space. You should have figured out now. Just that said, corona is real. Obviously, viruses are real, though God help me, some people don't think they are. But as serious as Corona is, and again, I'm not trying to downplay how serious it is. The sky is not falling, the world is not coming into an end. And realistically, we have seen far more serious diseases as a species. Before I get into prophecy, even I'll give you three specific examples of diseases that mankind has gone through, has survived, that were worse than Corona is. The first and the most famous of the three, I would have to say, is the Black Death. This ran for a couple of years in the early 14th century. It wasn't very long, but it was before the development of antibiotics. It was before indoor plumbing. It killed about half the population of Europe in a matter of years. A lot of people don't understand how it actually spread, because that is actually relevant to the Corona. Because when people think of the Black Death, they think of it spreading through fleas. And that's true. Y. pestis, which is the name of the bacteria, and it is a bacteria, not a virus, that causes death, is commonly spread through fleas. And fleas on rats or possibly guinea pigs are most likely how it was first introduced to Europe. That's not how it spread through Europe, though. Because here's the thing. There are three types of Black Death, all caused by Y. pestis. There is the bubonic plague, which is what you catch from fleas. Kills you in 2 or 3 days. It's nasty. Even today, it is a very serious disease. We can treat it. Antibiotics will completely treat the plague. But if you do not treat it quickly, people still do die of the bubonic plague. That's not how it spread widely, though, and there's a reason why we thought for a long time it was, and I'm going to get to that too. The way that it spread is another form of disease, which is called the pneumonic plague. The pneumonic plague is what happened to people who had the bubonic plague, or at first it was bubonic plague that moved into people's lungs, and it spread like the flu, or it spread, Corona, which we know is airborne. We didn't realize at first that, for a long time, I should say, even that the pneumonic plague is the main way it spread through Europe, because where it takes 2 or 3 days to die of the bubonic plague, if you contract the pneumonic plague, you've got a day, maybe 2 at the most. People died before they reached the doctors. It was that serious. And the third form is the septicemic plague, which caused by a massive dose of the bacteria. And yeah, if you catch that one, you have about a day. All of this, again, half the population of the planet in a matter of years from the Black Death. Now, an older one that is also extremely serious and is an important example for Corona is smallpox. Most people today, and pretty much anyone born after 1980, only know smallpox as that thing that the Europeans gave the Native Americans that you read about in history books. A lot of people have no idea how bad smallpox used to be. It was eradicated in 1979. There hasn't been a case of it since then anywhere on the planet. Before that, in the 20th century, just the 20th century, it killed approximately 500 million people. Why this story is particularly important to Corona and COVID-19 is why it hated. We developed a vaccination. In fact, smallpox vaccine is the first proper vaccine that we developed. as the vaccine got more and more widespread, cases of the disease got fewer and fewer. Eventually wiped out. Exactly like COVID, smallpox is caused by a virus. Teresa Hall, Gulf City Pagan, said that they got the vaccine at school. That's interesting because I was born in '76. By the time, as far as I know, I don't think I ever got the smallpox vaccine. I might have when I was a baby, but they stopped. God forbid, if there was another outbreak of smallpox right now, and it is at least hypothetically possible, because while there is no naturally occurring examples of the disease anywhere, it's still contained in a couple of the very highest levels of biological weapons research laboratories, the class 4 ones. If that ever got loose through a terrorist attack or something like that, the vast majority of people, particularly anyone born after in the 80s or later, haven't been vaccinated because we haven't seen a case in decades. Oh, okay, Teresa. Teresa was apparently born in '67. That would explain it. But again, we got on top of it. We vaccinated. It doesn't happen anymore. It would take a terrorist attack to see another major outbreak of smallpox. So for God's sakes, when they do develop one, get the COVID vaccine. I've done lots of other videos on it, so I'm not going to belabor the point about the importance, safety, and efficacy of vaccines. But go ahead and watch them. But needless to say, vaccines work. Vaccines are safe, unless you have a legitimate medical reason not to. And let's be clear, there are legitimate medical reasons. Get the bloody vaccine. I don't care what your religion is. It's especially get it for your children. It's irresponsible and borderline child abuse at best not to, barring legitimate medical reason again. Now, the last example I want to bring up, which is also pretty relevant, because also goes to a disease that people underestimate all the bloody time, which is influenza, the flu. 1918 to 1920, there was a massive outbreak of Spanish flu, of H1 of a strain of H1N1, which killed 50 million people. 500 million worldwide were infected in the course of 2 years. People tend to think when you talk about the flu, they think that it's no big deal. You don't have to worry about it. You don't need the vaccine. The flu won't kill you. People die every year of influenza. The common cold, right, and the rhinovirus ones, aren't serious. People do occasionally catch them and have heart problems and respiratory problems, but mostly you can survive them. The flu absolutely is. People die from the flu. Get that bloody vaccine too. Okay. Again, none of this is to say that Corona isn't serious. I am not telling you to go run out and hang out on the beach with the idiots in California that are doing that right now, or to join the protest. And all I am saying is, calm down. We've survived worse. We'll survive this. Now let's talk about what we're actually, the other side of this is, which is the end of the world. Because even before Corona, people have been convinced that the other shoe is gonna drop any second, since literally 5 minutes after Jesus died. And every generation, in fact, not even every generation, every few years, somebody is sure the end is nigh, dogs and cats are going to start living together. It is the time. Some groups have made a big deal about this. Jehovah's Witnesses have made no less than five. Actually, correction. The last time I looked up, I think it's 7 different failed attempts to predict the end of the world. Harold Camping very famously predicted the end of the world a whole series of times, only a few years ago, before finally admitting that, no, wait, I'm obviously wrong. Another real good example of this is a group called the Millerites. So a man by the name of Joseph Miller in the 1900s became convinced that by applying various things he had found in scripture and various ideas he had about mathematics, that he knew when the end of the world was. And let me look that up. October 22nd, 1944, or excuse me, 1844, he and his followers became absolutely convinced this was it. This was the day. People sold their homes. People gathered in stadiums. People were absolutely convinced the day was upon us. God was returning. Be ready. Needless to say, nothing happened. A whole bunch of people took his idea, and the fact that he was obviously wrong because they were still here, and refigured the numbers a little. From this, actually, we get two sects that are still alive today, although the Millerites themselves are largely a thing of the past. One is very well known, and I've done videos about it on the channel before, which is the Jehovah's Witnesses. Charles Taze Russell was a follower of this movement who became convinced he had figured out the correct date and then made a series of failures on that. Another group that's not as well known but is still pretty prominent today would be the Seventh-day Adventists, who are still have plenty of issues, but are probably a little less. Okay, I'm going to say it because I can't think of a nicer way of putting it. Nutty than Jehovah's Witnesses. But they both started from this original movement in what they call the Great Disappointment. You can look it up; it's an actual thing that happened. At the turn of the last millennium, from 999 to 1000, people were so convinced that because it was 1,000 years since the birth of Christ, technically it wasn't, but they were so convinced that because of that the world was going to end. They stopped war. Wars stopped. The Pope held the final midnight mass. People were, again, absolutely convinced that all the prophecies had lined up. All the ducks were in the row. It was going to happen. Needless to say, they were very embarrassed when the world kept on ticking along. So, okay, given all of this, what are the signs that the Bible gives that the world is going to end? The reality is, it's not all that specific. One prediction that is generally agreed on by most scholars of biblical prophecy is that the Temple of Solomon, the Temple of Jerusalem, the Temple of Solomon, that was destroyed by the Romans in 63 AD, I want to say, I'm not going to look it up, but it's around 63 AD, has got to be rebuilt because the Bible talks about the beast that everyone associates with the Antichrist sitting in the temple of Jerusalem and declaring himself God, along with talking about various sacrifices and things that have to still be going on in the temple for God to return. So, like I said, a lot of people. So it's generally agreed that the rebuilding of the temple is among people that believe that the world is going to end, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But that is one of the biggest things that absolutely has to happen. That we can go, okay, now we're living in the end days. There's a couple of problems with this for those of you who aren't aware. So the site that the temple in question was built on is what's now known as the Temple Mount. Like I said, the Romans destroyed it in 63 AD. There are several major problems with rebuilding the temple. For one, under Jewish law, to rebuild the temple, they have to make a very specific sacrifice. They have to sacrifice a red heifer, a female cow, to be able to build it. Now, red cows aren't exactly common, but they do happen. The problem that's because we've had red cows happen from time to time, but they still haven't been able to find one to sacrifice. The reason for this is it has to be just about pure red. If they can find even more than 3 hairs on that cow that are white or any color other than red, it's not a good enough sacrifice. They've been coming close for years, but every cow, to my knowledge, has been rejected as not good enough. So that's one reason they can't rebuild the temple. Another major reason they can't rebuild the temple, in fact, there's 2 directly related reasons, is that the Muslims built their own mosque right on the top of it. And more problematic than that, it's okay, it's not a great idea, but mosques can be demolished or moved. But the mosque that was built on top of it was a mosque known as the Dome of the Rock. In Islam, there are the 2 holiest sites in the world are Mecca, and particularly the Black Stone in Mecca, which is by far the holiest of the holy sites in Islam. It isn't that when Muslims pray, it isn't that they pray to the east, they pray in the direction of Mecca. The second holiest site, which is profoundly important to Muslims, is the location from which they believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven, which was on the Temple Mount, and they built a mosque on it called the Dome of the Rock. To rebuild the Temple of Solomon, they'd have to bulldoze the Dome of the Rock. Not only that, but in a lot of the plans for the rebuilt temple, it'd be absolutely massive. And a church called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is one of the most important holy sites to Christianity, would also have to be destroyed or moved. If you're not familiar, the reason why the Holy Sepulchre is so important is it is one of 2 sites, the other being the famous Garden Tomb, that Christians believe may have been the tomb that Jesus laid in for 3 days while he was dead. So this is a really big problem. And again, people have been trying to figure a workaround for this problem for centuries, really. And they always think they're close. All through I'm 43. I've heard all through my life that they had finally figured it. They had found the heifer. They had figured out a plan that wasn't going to require them to destroy the mosque or the church. They had some solution. And I'm 43, and they still haven't built it. Beyond that, it's prophesied there will be wars and rumors of wars. Yes, there'll be natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, pestilence, diseases, and things like that. But let's be honest, there isn't really a point in human history that we haven't had natural disasters, that we haven't had war, we haven't had rumors that war was coming. These aren't specific enough prophecies to go, aha, that's the one, that means it's here. And then let's talk about the big one, which is the one that everybody one of the big, it's not so much a prophecy as a judge. So once the end times kicks off, there's a series of judgments that are unleashed on the earth. And by far, the most famous of them, and the one that everybody's thinking of and going, wait, is this a sign of the end times? Is, of course, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. 4 riders described in the Bible, in the book of Revelations. And let me read, before I get into what each of the horsemen symbolizes, let me read some of the verses we're talking about. So Revelation 6, 1-2, from the New American Standard. And then I saw the lamb, and then I saw when the lamb broke one of the seven seals, and heard one of the four living creatures saying as with the voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and behold a white horse, and he who sat upon it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. This is the the first rider, the one who rides the white horse. Um, there's a bunch of ways that this is interpreted. Um, one of the most one of the stranger ways it's been interpreted is that it's actually talking about Jesus, because later in Revelation he does show up on riding a white horse. And he does show up to conquer, to lay waste to the army, to the mortal armies. I don't agree, and a lot of scholars don't agree, particularly because Revelation describes when Jesus returns about a sword that comes from his mouth to slay his enemies. It doesn't describe him carrying a bow. Another way that common way that it's interpreted is that this is the figure that everybody thinks of as the Antichrist. He carries a bow. He conquers, and he is described in this way, having a crown. People have suggested that it's a reference to a figure that shows up later, one of the great beasts of Revelation, with the 7 horns and 10 heads, that people have interpreted to be this figure they call the Antichrist, even though the title Antichrist never appears in the book of Revelation. So, second horseman. This is Revelation 6:3-4. When he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, "Come." And another, a red horse, came out. And to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, that men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. This one, it's not too hard to figure out what it's talking about. This is war. What more do you want? Then Revelation 6:5-6. When he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And behold, a black horse, and he who sat upon it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures say, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, but do not damage the oil and wine." This horseman is almost always interpreted, of course, as being famine, because it's talking about how expensive food will become, how rare food will become, that food in the end times. Other people have interpreted this as apparently the Lord is God is giver of laws, and it's the scales of justice. The price is just indicating that grain will be cost about 10 times what it normally would have. That one denarius would buy enough wheat for one person for an entire day, or enough barley for 3. And then, of course, is the last horse, Revelation 6:7-8. When the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth creature saying, "Come." And I looked and beheld an ashen horse, and he who sat upon him had the name Death, and Hades followed with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. This one's not hard to figure out. It's the Grim Reaper. This is death. And that's the thing that's interesting. A lot of times you'll see it translated as the Pale Horseman. You'll notice in the translation I read, it's translated as the Ashen Horseman. If you're curious, basically the word that's translated as pale doesn't mean pale in the modern sense that English speakers would think. It's more like the decayed color of green that you'd find in a dead body. Because again, this horseman is death. You'll notice though, and this I think this tends to surprise a lot of people, that this last horseman, it talks about the four being able to kill with pestilence, among other famine and pestilence and the beasts of the earth. There's no horseman that's explicitly described as being pestilence. I'm not quite sure where the idea that pestilence came from, but it came in later. It's not explicitly described as such in the Bible. Not one of the horsemen. He's often tied to conquest or the Antichrist, that first horseman on the white horse, or with famine, or sometimes, of course, with death. But it's not a distinct thing. Certainly, disease is generally considered part of the end times, but it's not. Again, this figure of conquest is the first horseman, not disease. I read you what the verses say. I don't think And here's another thing, and this I think is particularly important. Which is Matthew 24:36. Matthew 24:36. Let's see. Pick a translation, any translation. Okay, that'll work. From the New King James Version. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. This is Jesus himself speaking. Jesus is saying he doesn't know when the end will. Even he doesn't know when the end will come. But the angels don't know when the end will come. Now, there's other verses that talk about the end coming like a thief in the night. About two men walking up a hill, one just is gone and the other one's still standing there, in that concept of the rapture that people talk about. This idea that we can look and go, look, it's the end of the world, is not consistent with the Bible. It's not consistent with Christianity. The Bible is very clear. We won't know. It'll come like that. Just like death itself comes without warning. So anytime somebody looks and goes, the end is nigh, repent now, don't listen to them. They don't know. And it's hubris to claim that they do. There's a whole series of other things, of course, that happen after this. There's a huge earthquake. There's all of these other important prophecies. But here's another piece of food for thought. There are a number of ways of interpreting the Book of Revelations. The most common is the most well-known, I should say, is the premillennial interpretation, which is what I've been discussing, and what the Left Behind novels and the Thief in the Night books and the Apocalypse series from Cloud 10 Pictures are all based on. This idea that God's going to come back and take his elect, and then there's going to be hell on earth for some period of time, usually thought to be 7 years, before the final judgment. There's also the belief that the rapture, as people talk about, is halfway through the 7-year period. Because believing the first half is actually the war against Christians by Satan. There's the opinion that the rapture won't even happen until the end of the whole thing, when God calls his elite home and sends everybody else to hell, which is called postmillennialism. Then there's the other one that very few people talk about, but is worth discussing: Peterism. A lot of what's described in Revelation, and given a proper historical context, and depending on interpretation, has already come to pass. Arguably, all of it has. Not in the Middle Ages, not hundreds of years after it was written, but during the time of Rome, particularly during the time of Emperor Nero Caesar. Certainly during Nero's time, there was a great persecution of Christians. Certainly There were disease and war. And the Romans were always big on conquest. There were various issues with the famine and the empire restricting food at various times. There were certainly earthquakes and things of that nature. There's a school of thought that suggests that, in point of fact, Revelation is simply a history of early Christianity under Rome and things that have come to pass. A particular thing that suggests this is that there's another part of Revelation where Saint John, the Revelator, the one who's supposed to have written it. I'm not going to get into right now the debates and arguments over who actually wrote it. It's not relevant to the discussion, but whoever wrote it writes specific messages to specific Christian churches, all of which existed at the time. He's not talking about hypothetical churches. He's talking about actual churches and historical perceptions of early Christians about those churches. There's another thing that gives credence to this idea, which is gematria. So pretty much everyone listening, and just about everyone everywhere, has heard of the Antichrist, and more particularly the 666, right? Everybody's terrified of the number 666. The Bible says that this mark of the beast, the number of the beast, is the number of a man, and associates this number with that man's name. Well, how do you do that? Those of you with Teresa, you may think of it, and anyone else with a New Age type bent may think of numerology. There is this whole school of thought called numerology, where the letters in your name have a numeric value, and you can add them up, and those various numbers tell you, the number that you come up with by adding the letters up in your name together, tell you something about your personality and potentially your future. Ancient Judaism had an idea like this too. Modern Judaism still has an idea. It's called gematria. It's this idea from Jewish Kabbalah that each letter in Hebrew, particularly as it appears in the Bible, has a specific meaning associated with it, has a number associated with it. So by using gematria, you can add the letters in a name together and get a numerical value for it. The name in the Hebrew version of the name Nero Caesar. Anyone want to take a guess what it equals in gematria? 666, or possibly 616, depending on a couple of things. There's debate over whether the number of the beast is actually 666 or 616, based on translating issues. But the figure of Nero fits a lot of the prophecies of the Beast of Revelations. Because again, remember what I said, the Beast of Revelation isn't referred to in Revelation as being the Antichrist. The name Antichrist appears in the Gospels. And actually, it's discussing a spirit, a particular type of spirit that denied the divinity of Jesus Christ. The Beast of Revelations is described as having 7 heads and 10 horns, and each horn has a crown upon it, and one of the heads has been wounded as if with a sword. Then there's the other beast, and the one that rides upon it, which is the whore of Babylon, which is a whole other thing with a false religion. There is a school of thought that thinks that the Beast of Revelation is a reference to the Roman Empire, which is this huge, nearly globe-spanning empire. Well, not quite globe-spanning, but it spanned nearly the entire known world. And here's the other thing, kids. One of the reasons that first-century Christians in particular were persecuted by the Romans, well, and for that matter, why the Jews before them were persecuted by the Romans, was that the Romans considered the emperors, the Caesars, the children of the gods. They believed they had divine authority and should be worshipped as such. When Julius Caesar died, his successor, Augustus Caesar, pointed up in the sky where Halley's Comet was actually passing overhead and said that that was Julius ascending back to Mount Olympus. That Julius was in fact the child of Apollo, of the Greek god Apollo, and a human woman. These stories were, it was also believed that Nero was the child of a god, that Nero had this special divine status, that Nero needed to be worshipped. And Nero was not a knight. There are things about his story that get unfairly maligned, but he was not a good, nice man, particularly the Christians. He didn't. Well, it's absolute myth that he fiddled while Rome burned. For one thing, they didn't have fiddles yet. For another thing, he wasn't in Rome when the Great Fire happened. In fact, what actually happened is when he heard about the Great Fire, he rushed back to the city and started organizing firefighting brigades to save it. What he did after the fire was reprehensible, because he wound up using it as an excuse to rebuild his palace and make it even bigger. He also used it as an excuse to further persecute the early Christians. I don't claim to know for certain if Revelation is a book of prophecy or a book of history, or possibly both. But it's worth keeping in mind, again, that this may not be a prophecy of the end time. And here's another thing that I think is important. We aren't meant to live our lives as if God is going to go and kill all the non-Christians. Well, yeah, if Nero played anything, it would have been most likely the lyre, possibly the harp. The violin, aka the fiddle, wasn't invented until centuries after the time of Rome. Rome had fallen before they had violin, so he definitely didn't play it. Like I said, I personally think there could be it could be partly prophecy, or history tends to be very cyclical. One hypothesis I've thought of before is if an end's going to come, and I'm generally inclined to believe that at some point God's going to have had enough of our bullshit. To be blunt and a little crass. But I'm inclined to think that when the end comes, has a lot to do, less to do with God forcing it to happen and man deciding to bring it about. There's so many times through history we've brought ourselves to the brink. The Cuban Missile Crisis and how close we came to nuclear war. For that matter, World War II and how completely psychopathic Hitler was and Stalin were. If decent human beings hadn't risen up and done something, what might have happened to the world? What happened to the world before people rose up and did something about it? 9 to 12 million innocent people, including the Jews, who were common, especially the Jews, who are most commonly associated with the persecutions that the Antichrist will unleash upon the earth, because they're because of what the Old Testament says about them being the chosen people of God, were slaughtered in stupid, senseless ways for stupid, senseless reasons. It's hard to look at that and go, if we've ever come to the very brink of the end, that wasn't one of the biggest times. And I think maybe we pulled ourselves back and we said, no, we aren't going to let this happen. And needless to say, because I want to touch on this briefly as well, other religion, when people think of the end of the world in Armageddon, they think of Christianity. And certainly when you talk about Armageddon, that's from Christianity. Particularly, it's a reference to the plains of Megiddo, which is an area just outside of Jerusalem. In Israel, it is a huge, massive, flat plain that a number of important battles have happened on throughout history, and even Napoleon commented as he passed across it that it would be a perfect place for a giant battle. But there are other religions that have an idea of the end of the world too. Not as famously as Harold Camping, perhaps, but not a few years ago, Norse neo-pagans were convinced that that was the beginning of Ragnarok, which is the Norse end of the world. I'll tell you this: I'm not saying that Ragnarok is ever going to happen, but if it ever does happen, you're going to know about it. Because in the Norse stories of Ragnarok, the first thing that happens before the great final war between the gods and the giants is 300 years of winter. I mean, it's been a little cold lately, but we haven't had 300 years straight of unending winter. They call it fumble winter. Jews also, of course, have an idea of the end of the world, which is similar in many ways to Christians. The big difference for Jews, excuse me, is where Christians believe that the Messiah has come and will be returning when the end of the world comes. Jews believe that the Messiah will come for the first time at the end. Although again, they also have an idea of this malevolent figure akin to the Antichrist. Islam has its own underworld, which I don't know a whole lot about, although I know it also has its Antichrist figure. But again, in all seriousness, people have been thoroughly convinced the world is going to end for just about as long as you can imagine, maybe longer. Every few years, somebody is calling the end is nigh. In fact, during the time of Jesus, there were Jews that thought the end was nigh. It's one, Jesus is by far the most famous example, but there were a whole bunch of itinerant preachers at the time that were claiming to be the Jewish Messiah. The Bible even describes some of the other ones. The figure particularly mentions the name Bar Jesus, who supposedly claimed to perform some of the same miracles. We have been so again, Corona is not a joke. It's not something to play with, and for God's sakes, it's not a hoax. But it's not the end of the world yet. Chicken Little can go home. The sky is not falling. I know, and I'm not. Even when I say that, part of it, I'm trying to lighten the mood a little. Please realize I'm not trying to make fun of people who are scared, who are afraid. I'll be honest with you. I'm nervous. I'm secure. I work security during the day. My job is still considered essential. I get a little nervous when I have to go to work 5 days a week for 8 hours. Thank God in heaven I don't see very many people, so it's a relatively low risk, but I'm still working. I'm still out in public every single 5 days a week. My fiance, whose work is from home at any rate, has to go out to do grocery shopping. She has errands that she runs when I work. I'm concerned about all this too, and you're not foolish to be concerned. I'm just saying it's not the end. We should not live like we think that the whole world's about to be destroyed. Enjoy the moment, spend time with your family, love each other. And realize this. Is the entire world going to end tomorrow? Probably not. But none of us know how long we're going to be here. Don't panic about that either, for God's sakes. But make the most of the time that you have. Okay, folks? I'm going to wrap this up for the night. I got other things to get to. It's been an absolute pleasure spending time with you all. Now, no, geez, I'm going southern. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I wish you are all in my prayers. I wish you all the very best, you and your families, the very best, and I hope you get through this safely. Remember, May 16th and 17th, 2 weeks, is gonna be Wrath of Khan. The online convention. Go to the link in the description below. Check out our webpage for it. It's got some bios of some of the speakers we're going to have, some photos. It's got the Saturday schedule. We're still working on Sunday. We're still trying to put together people to speak. It's going to be extremely exciting. I'm going to do magic. Baron Voltage is going to do something related to hypnosis. My friend, the game designer Alex Strang, is going to be doing an interactive game here online that you not interactive as in I and him are going to do a game. Interactive as in those of you who watch are going to get to take part in this. You know, Dacre Stoker, the great grandnephew of Bram Stoker, is going to do a presentation. My good friend and frequent guest John French, who's an absolutely phenomenal writer. He's written a lot of detective fiction. He's done horror. He's done all these other things. Is going to read one or two short stories for us. And I've talked to him, and I've got an idea at this point of what stories he's likely to read, and they're really good stories. He's phenomenal. I highly recommend checking it out. My good friend and frequent guest Patrick Thomas is going to be on to do. I don't know what he's doing, but he's going to do something. Lilith, storyteller, and I should say Patrick as well is a phenomenal writer. If you like fantasy, he's a great guy. I would recommend right now, if you're looking for something to read, go to Amazon, look up Dacre Stoker, look up John French, and look up Patrick Thomas. Lots of great books. Some of them are really good deals right now. They're all going to be part of this convention. Alex Strang has done some fabulous board games and role-playing games and things of that nature. I don't know what he's got cooking for this interactive thing of his, but it should be awesome. We've got Lil Thor is a professional storyteller, and her husband Micah, who's written two fantastic books about the Bible and whims, sort of very serious. I mean, it's not like making things up. It's based on what's actually in there, but it's a whimsical take on the book of Genesis and Exodus. He's a very good guy. I'm excited to have him as part of this. The whole convention is going to be phenomenal. And remember, it's not going to be on this channel. I'm going to create, probably in the next couple of days, create a dedicated Wrath of Khan channel here on YouTube. All the videos are going to be on it. All the videos are going to be free. They're going to stay free. I'm going to link what I'm going to do in terms of promotion there is going to be telling people to come here. I'm not going to be asking people for money. I take that back. I am going to be asking people for money. I'm not going to be asking for money for me. I'm going to be a big push with this convention is going to be raising money for charity. It's still a serious issue, so at this point, I think it's almost certainly going to be coronavirus relief. If that dramatically changes in the next 2 weeks, then we'll switch to cancer. But otherwise, you don't have to donate money to charity either to take part in this. All you have to do is show up and enjoy it, and enjoy what people have to say. If you want to support the charity, I think that's a great idea because charity is worthwhile. But believe me, of all people, I understand how serious the economic situation is for people right now. So I am not going to badmouth. I'm not going to try to put you down if you can't do it. That's going to do it for tonight. Remember to check out that website and link below. If you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Go to our Facebook page for the Paranormal Encyclopedia, where I keep things regularly updated. And Wrath of Khan is also on Facebook, so you can keep an eye on what's going on with the convention. That's going to do it for tonight. Like I said, comment, subscribe. If you happen to have a couple of bucks, feel free to toss them to my Patreon in the description. If you don't, that's fine too, because again, times are tough. But that's it for now. Good night, everybody. Stay safe. Best to you and your family, and God bless.